This is the next video in my DevNet series of videos. In this video, we're going to be working with functions in Python, learning about functions. I'm using the book Python Crash Course Eric Mathis to organize my learning or to structure my learning. It's a great book from No Starch Press. I recommend you get it. So today, we're working on Chapter 8. We need to learn about functions. So for this one, I'm using the Sublime text editor. So in Linux Mint, I've got the Sublime text editor installed, and I've opened it up and I've saved a file named chapter8.py, and I'm ready to start creating some functions. Now, what are functions? They're reusable blocks of code. So when you know that you're going to write a bunch of lines of code, and then you're probably going to need that code again, instead of writing that code over and over again and repeating the same multiple lines, you just put your lines of code into a function, and then all you have to do is call the function by name, and you have a block that's reusable. So for instance, if I want to write a function, I say define the function and give it a name like greeting. And once again, this is chapter 8 in the book Python Crash Course. So define greeting and then a colon, and then we have our block, and this is where our function code block goes, right in here, indented. And I'm using a tab indent here. So the next thing that he introduced is a multi-line comment. A multi-line comment is 3 double quotes or 3 single quotes, and then I'll just type display greeting. Okay, and then I'll triple double quote it again, and now I have a multi-line comment. And what does that mean? That means that I could have D, I, S, P, and you can see here that it's all commented out, just with a beginning with a triple quote and ending with a triple quote, and it's all commented out. It won't run. This won't run. But we don't need to do that. We'll just put it all back on one line. So there we go. But it is introduced in the chapter, and so I thought I'd mention it. Okay, now 2 lines down, we're going to do something, and we'll just start by printing a string. So print the string Python. So now I have a function. The function is not very long. It just prints Python. Maybe it prints something else too. Python, and then we'll say programming, Python programming. So it does 2 things, and then ends out of the function. So this is a function. The function's name is greeting. Def defines a function named greeting. Then open and close parentheses. This is where we can pass arguments, and we'll do that in the next version of the function. And then a colon, and then the block begins. We don't use curly braces. We just indent to define where the function begins, where the block begins, and where it ends. So we don't have indentation, that's where it ends. Now, the funny thing about this is, if I go to Tools, Build, and I run the program, it runs, but it actually doesn't do anything, because we've defined the function, we've created the function, but with functions you have to call them. So if I want to call it, I have to put the name of the function with open and close parentheses, and now I've called the function. So Control B, and we run the program, and it says Python programming. And the nice part about functions is you can call them multiple times. So I could say, well, if I need to run that again, I'll just call it again. And now it runs twice. And if, 100 lines down in my code, I decide that I need to call the greeting function again, all I have to do is type the name of the function with open and close parentheses, and I can call it 3 times. And so that's the nice part about functions, is they make your code reusable, so you don't have to write all of the lines over and over again. So if there's something that's going to be repeated, you want to put it into a function. All right, so let's change this now. Now we're going to learn how to pass an argument to a function. So to pass an argument to your function, you just put the name of the argument, or basically the variable. So I could say X here if I wanted to, but I'm going to put username. So username will be the variable. So basically we'll be passing a username into the function, and it'll take on the variable name username. So now when I print this, I could say with an F string, your name is, and then username. We'll pass that in right there. I'll comment this out, this time with a hash, so that's commented out. So this won't execute, and this won't execute, just this. Print, your name is, and then username. So now when we call this function, I have to put in the username, and I'll say Dan, or something like that. So I call the function, and I pass in the argument, in this case a string with a name, and then username should adopt that. Now, notice I can use it right here, username, as a variable. So if I hit Control B, your name is Dan. And so, yeah, to pass that information into the function, and it takes on the variable name username, and then it's accessible within the code. All right, the next one that he does in the book is something like this, multiple arguments. So pet_info we'll say, and we're going to pass two arguments, type and name. And then when we print it, it says something like this. It uses an F string, \new line, and it's something like this. I have a, and this will be the type of the pet, type, okay, period. Then on the next line, print F string, double quotes, my, and then the type of the animal, my whatever it is, dog, cat, bird, my dog, cat, bird, apostrophe S, name is, and then name, just like that. Anyway, that's what he does in the book. Okay, so that looks good. So we'll be using the type here of the animal, and then the name will get used here. And we're going to pass these variables in. So these arguments need to get passed in. So we could say something like cat, and then the name would be something like this, Wednesday. And notice if I run this, Control B, I get an error, and it says name greeting is not defined. Name error. Greeting. Well, greeting was the previous name of the function, but I changed the name of this function to pet_info. So yeah, I have to call it with the name of the function, pet_info. And now I call it, and you can see I have a cat, so that got passed in to the type, and my cat's name is Wednesday, and the name variable, that this information got passed to the function. But what's nice about it is now, if I want to call it again, maybe I call it again, and this time I could say, I also have a dog named Harry or Jackson. And now if I call it, Control B, I have a cat, my cat's name is Wednesday, I have a dog, my dog's name is Jackson. So you can see how this reusable block of code could be used, and in this case you're passing in different information in these arguments. Okay, now one of the things that's interesting about this is that when you have arguments, they have to be passed in order. So in other words, if you were to flip this and say, you know, you put the wrong name in, for instance. So if you said, if I say, you know, Jackson here and dog here, and we call it, you can see I have a Jackson, my Jackson's name is dog, so Jackson takes on the type argument and dog takes on the name argument. So in other words, the order that you're calling these are important. And one of the things he points out in the book is to get around that is what we could do is if we wanted to put this information in out of order, we could say something like this, name equals Jackson, like that. And type equals dog, and let's see if that works. So we could just kind of manually declare that this is out of order, but the name needs to be Jackson and the type needs to be dog. Let's try that out. Control B, and it worked. So that's pretty neat. Another thing that's important to learn how to do is to learn how to return information using a function. So far we've learned how to write a function and pass in arguments into that function, and then those arguments can be used as variables within the function. But this time we're going to do something a little different. So this time what we'll do is we're going to say, and this is covered in the book, so he does something like this: format name, and then he passes in basically first name. We'll just say first, and then we'll say last. So the function is format underscore name, and then first and last. Okay, and then the comment here will say something like, we'll put in the comment, return the name formatted. So that's what we're going to do. So what we'll do is we'll say, first of all, we'll say now full underscore name equals, and then we're going to put the full name into a string. So we'll say f string, and we're going to need to have first and last, and maybe we want to put dot title so it gets capitalized, and maybe here dot title so that gets capitalized. So full name, we've got an f string here, so we're going to get first dot title and last dot title, and so we'd have this full name. Okay, so now what we can do is we're going to get rid of this. Let's take a look at what we have. So first of all, the name of the function here is format underscore name. We're going to have to pass it information. So I'm going to pass it in the information right here. Lowercase, since it's going to get made uppercase in the function. Mike and Trout, the baseball player. Okay, so format name Mike Trout. So full name equals the first and the last. Now if I call this Control B, I don't get an error, but I also don't get any output because I haven't printed anything. I've just passed Mike and Trout to the first and last arguments here, and then those get used to create full name. So that's great, but nothing got printed out. Well, what we could do with a function is, instead of using the print to print it out, what we could do is say return information. So when the function gets called, it's going to return a value, and we'll say return full name. So now when you call that function, full name variable gets created from the first and last name, and then we're going to return that name, and we should get some output. So now if I do Control B, I still get nothing, which is nice, because even though that information was returned, I need to take that information and put it into a variable. So even though I'm saying, okay, I want that information, it's still not getting printed to the screen, but it is being returned when we call it. So the key thing here is maybe to put that into a variable. So we'll say something like my name equals, and then we call the function, pass it the two names. It's going to return that information and put that information into this variable. So now if we want to print that to the screen, we just print my name or player's name or whatever. So Control B and Mike Trout. And of course that's not my name, so we'll say something like name. All right, we'll try that. Control B, and it still works. So you can see that when this function gets called, the value is returned and it's put into the variable, and then we can print that out. Now, one problem that's brought up in the chapter is sometimes you might have a function where you have more than just these two arguments. So let's say you have first, last, and middle. So you've got like a first name, a last name, and a middle initial. Now you want to then call the function. So here the function gets called, but there is no middle initial. Let's just say your name has no middle initial. So we'll just use the name John Doe. Okay, so John Doe, and there's no middle initial. So let's see what happens now when we call this function and the full name gets created and it gets returned and then it gets printed out. So we'll see what happens. So we'll do Control B, and you can see we get an error because, and the error tells us that we're missing one required positional argument. In other words, if the function has been defined and to take 3 arguments here, well, then we need to provide it 3 arguments, but we didn't. We just gave it John and Doe. We didn't give it the 3rd argument, so it errored out. But one of the interesting things that the book points out is that you could take this and you could make an optional argument here by assigning it. So you can say middle equals, and then we'll just assign it an empty string using 2 single quotes here. So now I have an empty string. So essentially what you're doing is this argument right here is getting a default value of an empty string. So it's actually being assigned a default value here. So if you don't use anything, if you only assign first and last and you don't assign the middle, it won't matter because it has a default value that's set right there. So now if I do Control B, it works. Or if I say John Doe and middle initial S or something and do Control B, well, it should get the name here. We need, of course, to put in here first, last, and we'll put in here right in the middle. It's not going to show up unless we put it in the full name here. So middle, there we go. Dot title. Okay, so first, middle, title. All right, we do Control B here and John S. Doe. Okay, or we get rid of it and do Control B and we get John Doe, although it did put a space in there, which is kind of an awkward space right there. So we would probably have to figure out how do we strip out that white space, the missing piece here when we don't need it. But anyway, you get the idea. So the next one that's covered in the book is, I'm just going to copy and paste this. And this is copied and pasted straight from the book. We'll paste it in here if it'll work. Okay, in this one, the function define greet users, and then we pass in the argument is names. And then what will be interesting about this is that we're actually, that usernames is a list. So let me cut that. I'll put that up here at the top. You don't have to have it at the top, but we have a list named usernames, Hannah, Ty, and Margot. Then our function, greet user, and we pass in the names. Now, when we pass in the names, it's going to take on the variable names. Then we can loop for name in names, loop through the names, and create a message variable with an F string that takes the name and titleizes it, and then prints that name. And so that would loop through each user. Now, all we have to do is pass it in. So we say greet users, call the function, and then pass it the list. So there's the list getting passed in. And if we run it, you can see hello Hannah, hello Ty, hello Margot. And if we wanted to add a user here, let's say like Dave, and then run it again with a Control B, you can see that it prints out Dave. So there it is, a function and passing a list through the argument right here, calling the function and passing the array or the list as an argument into the function, and then using that the whole list in a loop to create your message. All right, I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to create another part where part 2, where we continue on with functions.